The Nintendo Switch Pro has been a pretty hot topic recently. And by recently, I mean for the past several years. People have been asking for a Switch Pro ever since about 2019 when the rumors first started floating around. And oh god, were there a lot of rumors. Before every Nintendo Direct, Switch Pro rumor. Every single E3, Switch Pro rumor. Excluding 2020 because there was no E3 that year. Everyone was speculating that Nintendo would announce a Switch Pro. Now the reasoning behind this is understandable. Quite a lot of games don't run well on Switch. A lot of third-party offerings just don't run well on the platform. So it's understandable that people want Nintendo to release a more powerful system, just so that their favorite games could run better on their favorite platform. And then Nintendo Switch's portability, giving it an edge over other consoles because you can play the games portably. So obviously, people want it to run better. Because as of right now, the Switch's screen is 720p even on the OLED, which is definitely an upgrade they should have made. The dock natively displays it at 1080p, so that's not great, and sometimes it's not even a consistent 1080-60. A lot of the times it goes 720p on docked, and even 720p 30 for some games, and it even can't run those consistently. But Nintendo's first-party offerings often run smooth as butter. And again, Nintendo currently doesn't need a Switch Pro. And I'm about to explain to you why. Remember what happened when we were all hyped up for the new PS5 and Xbox Series X? They sold out immediately, scalpers got them, the launch window was kind of ruined by scalpers, shortages, no one could find a PS5 or Xbox Series X anywhere. Remember what happened when everyone was hyped for the new graphics cards from Nvidia and AMD? They went out of stock immediately and were scalped to 200-300% of their prices. And the same thing would happen to a Switch Pro. As we noticed in 2020, even the base Switch itself went out of stock constantly and was scalped after the Animal Crossing New Horizons edition came out. Just Animal Crossing in general was such a big game on the Switch. And Doom Eternal as well. That came out on Switch opening day, I think. Anyway, Animal Crossing especially was so hyped because of the quarantine that Switches were out of stock for months. That's around the time when I wanted to get my Switch, and I couldn't find one for a long while. The only thing that was in stock that was the Lite. And now we're seeing that where all the other consoles are out of stock, but the Switch still has many units on the shelves. Every time I go into a store to buy a new game, I see Switches on the shelves. I see no PS5s, no Xbox Series X's. Maybe sometimes there's an Xbox or two, but that's because they're in less demand than the PS5. And then Nintendo Switch Pro would suffer exactly the same fate as those consoles and graphics cards. The supply shortage has affected Nintendo as well, as we saw with the limited Switch production. Right now they're getting by because they're an older hardware, which means it's not as demanding on the suppliers, and it's just easier to produce in general. That's why they're doing so well right now, because the Switch is often the only console you can find. And the fact that they're releasing such quality first parties means that they're in a perfect position right now, where they can ride off the Switch right now. It just passed 100 million sales, why wouldn't they? And then when the time is right, they'll release a Switch Pro when they can actually supply one, giving them a much better and bigger launch than the PS5 or Xbox Series X. Nintendo's strategy here is pretty smart, because they're not going to release a new console when newly released consoles are still being out of stock. Those were releasing in 2020. In 2019? No, 2020. When consoles released in 2020 are still out of stock in 2022, you probably shouldn't release a new console yourself. And right now, the games are getting by. Nintendo's still supporting the Switch heavily with new releases, especially in 2022, which makes me think 2022 is the final year where they support the Switch like this. There'll probably still be games beyond in 2023, but I think by 2024 we'll probably get a new Switch when all the production woes are over. According to the industry, I believe that the silicon shortage and all this stuff is going to end closer to 2023. So it's good that Nintendo's going to wait until getting the Switch Pro, therefore making the Switch Pro a good piece of hardware and not another Wii U. Not only that, but they build up the hype with bigger games in 2024. And they have all the stock they need at launch, meaning that the console won't go out of stock and be scalped for crazy prices. Nintendo will have a smooth and flawless launch of the Switch Pro. And the reason they released the Switch OLED right now is to just, they kept up consumer faith that they haven't forgotten about upgrading the Switch. They released some much needed quality of life features like the kickstand. While the Switch OLED's price was definitely probably not justified if you already own a Switch, for new people it gave them something to look forward to. And it was also still very much so easy to find, because it's built almost the same as a regular Switch, just with the OLED screen. I believe there are a few under the hood improvements, but nothing crazy, so it won't go out of stock like all the other consoles. So Nintendo Switch Pro right now is not a great idea. You have so many games that people are hyped for in 2022 on the actual Switch. Releasing a Switch Pro would just mean everyone wants a Switch Pro, and people will stop buying the Switch right now. And also, when the Switch Pro comes out, it'll be out of stock. So, it's not a win-win for anyone here. Nintendo releases the Switch Pro in 2022. That's why 2023, maybe mid to late 2023, maybe even 2024, but I doubt it by then, that's when the Switch Pro will release. And I have no doubt that it will release. Nintendo knows that the Switch is underpowered after things like the GTA trilogy and maybe Sonic Colors Ultimate. Arguably, that was more of an issue with the development of the games, but still. And so, in conclusion, Nintendo doesn't really need a Switch Pro as of right now. The games do still run, their first-party offerings run smoothly, because they work on optimizing them, and the first parties are the real reason why people buy the Switches. So as of right now, they'll be fine. Metroid Dread and other quality titles like that, Kirby and the Forgotten Land, all these titles are going to run well enough, and the Switch can run third-party titles right now. So it'll do fine into 2022 and 2023, especially with the current sales and the track it's going on right now. That's why the Switch Pro doesn't need to release yet. It needs to release eventually, but not yet, not right now, especially with the shortages going on right now. That's it for me, Davron signing off.